Hello YouTube and welcome back to another alternate history video. And today I got the 1976 presidential election, which was held between Jimmy Carter, governor of Georgia, and incumbent president Gerald Ford. So in this alternate scenario, of course, I got Nelson Rockefeller, who was the incumbent vice president at the time. He chose not to run alongside Ford in the election, and of course Bob Dole was the running mate of Ford instead. And maybe Ford decides not to run because of the stagnating economy and the pardon of Nixon because of Watergate. And Rockefeller decides to run for the nomination. And so, like I said, in 76, it was a stagflated economy, and Watergate was happening the past few years. Nixon resigned. Ford pardoned him as president. And so we'll see what happens here. This was the map that happened. Let me put in Rockefeller here. All right, so there we go. Nelson Rockefeller. I'm gonna put these states as toss up. I forgot to do this first starting the video, so apologies on that. So yeah, like I said, this was 1976 with pardoning Nixon and the economy a big issue. And Carter ran as an outsider. Ford ran on his experience. All right, there we go. So getting into this, like I was saying, it was a change versus experience election. And this is with Rockefeller's nominee. If you ever heard of Rockefeller Republicanism, that's it was coined after Nelson Rockefeller, who was the governor of New York. And of course, like I said, was the VP during this time. So I believe Carter would take these southern states that he won over time on, like Tennessee, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, Alabama, and some state of Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, the great state of West Virginia, Kentucky, Florida, Texas. I believe these will all go for him still, due to Rockefeller being a more liberal Republican type. I don't think he would do too well here in the South. I think he would do even worse than Ford. Or it would definitely increase his support even more in the rural areas. I could see Rockefeller doing okay in some of the cities like Atlanta, maybe. But I say Carter still doing great elsewhere in a lot of rural areas. That would hand him the victory in these states still, like in our timeline. He also won Missouri, so I think he would take that here too. States like in the Northeast, like Rockefeller, some state New York, I believe would go for him. I do go for Carter, but I believe Rockefeller won it due to being his home state, doing better in places like New York City and the boroughs. Carter will still do good in them too, but I say Rockefeller doing just a little bit better to win his home state due to having, like I said, the liberal moderate stances and stuff, like the economy and social issues, being more tough on crime though, a more internationalist foreign policy. I think it would take states like Vermont, New Hampshire that went for Ford. Like I said, Rockefeller Republicanism, Rockefeller himself, I think would win these because of that. Same deal in Maine, all of Maine, in fact, went for Ford. The second district, if I recall, was pretty close, though. So maybe that could go either way, but I think if Ford was able to pull out, then Rockefeller could too. I could see that going either way, honestly. But I'll just go with the Rockefeller. The state of Massachusetts went for Carter. Like I said, I want to get a little closer due to Rockefeller being on the ticket, but it was a solid margin that Jimmy won it by, so I think he would still win it here due to it being very culturally and liberal and on social issues as well. But like I said, they could be susceptible to Rockefeller, but I think it would still go to Carter in this scenario. He also won Rhode Island, so I think he could still win it here too, but states like Connecticut, New Jersey went for Ford, so I think they would go for Rockefeller too. Be a more moderate Republican state, and Rockefeller fit in that bill. The state of Delaware, I believe, will go for Carter. Like I said, I want to get a little closer, but I think it would still go for Carter since he won an hour timeline. as well as Maryland. Like I said, that'd be another close one, but I think due to Baltimore that Carter would pull it off since he didn't have our timeline. And of course, Washington, D.C. State like Alaska, though, I think would go for Rockefeller. Like I said, I want to get a little closer, but I think it being very historically Republican would stick with them. I think it would take these western states like Washington, Oregon, California. They're doing very well in the suburban parts of the state, especially California, doing good in cities there, the Bay Area. I think it would take them. State like Nevada, they go for Ford, maybe more rural back then. Carter, I think, did good, like in Clark County. I could say Rockefeller doing pretty good in it with supportive labor unions. And Carter might do better in the rural areas, but I think since Ford was able to pull it off, and Rockefeller could too, but more closer though. Same deal in Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah, Mormon Belt. I don't think they'd be too thrilled with Rockefeller, but I think they would still vote for him regardless, being very historically Republican. And I don't think they really vote for Carter, so they probably still hold their noses and vote for Rockefeller. Like I say, those states maybe getting somewhat closer, but not really anywhere near winning for Carter. Same deal with Montana. Like I say, I'm getting closer. They typically support more moderate Democrats like John Tester in our current time. But I don't know if Carter really pulled it off. I think it was pretty solid for Ford. It was under 10, I believe. So for that same reason, I could say I'm going to look closer, but Rockefeller would pull it out there by a few points maybe. I think it would win these states like Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico. Same deal as these other states, more sparsely populated back then. Whatever suburban cities there were, I think Rockefeller would do good in to win them. These Great Plains states, I could say, are going a little closer, especially the Dakotas. They tend to like more moderate Democrats, and Carter fits that bill. North Dakota, I'm actually going to go to Wikipedia for this one, see how close they were. So North Dakota was 51-45 for Ford. Maybe Rockefeller could pull it out by a couple points. South Dakota, however, could be an interesting one. I think that one was closer. And whenever South Dakota was competitive back then, it tended to be more closer to the North. And it was only about a margin of 1%. So for that reason, I think Carter could actually pull out South Dakota due to doing great in rural areas. Rockefeller wouldn't have the greatest rural support. And I could actually see Carter pulling this out. It might be a little shocking to say that, but as I said, it was only decided by a point. So it isn't like our modern day. Carter had better rural support, so for that reason, I think he could pull it out in South Dakota. Rockefeller being too liberal for these areas. Nebraska, however, was a solid one for Ford. So I think Nelson can still pull it out, but a reduced margin, as I talked about in these other states. State of Kansas was Bob Dole's home state, the running mate of Ford. And it was a pretty solid one, so as I say, they're 52-44. It'd be under 10, but I think Nelson could pull it out since Ford was able to. The state of Oklahoma was a pretty close one, as you see there. 4-1 with plurality of the vote. Another one decided by 1%, just like South Dakota. So for that reason, due to Carter doing great in a lot of rural Oklahoma, as you see there, Ford did better like in Tulsa and Oklahoma counties, as you see there. But I think Carter could pull it out due to rural support. Rockefeller, like I said, being more of the liberal wing of the party, wouldn't have his great support. And for that reason, Rockefeller being more liberal Republican, I think could pull out Illinois, since Ford was more moderate Republican too. Due to doing great in the suburbs of the state, Carter, I think, would do better in the rural areas down south. But I think due to Rockefeller doing pretty good in Clark County, where Chicago is, I think Carter would probably still eke out a win in Chicago, but I think the suburban counties surrounding it, I think Rockefeller could do well in and win it. Kind of narrowly, though. The state of Indiana here was a Ford state, only by 7 points. Carter did good in the southern counties, also won Vigo County. And I could say that happened here too. I could say it getting closer, but I think Rockefeller would prevail in the end, due to be a more historically Republican state. just like these states out here. So I could see Nelson Rockefeller pulling it off by about 4 or 5 points. It would definitely be closer, but I think Rockefeller could pull it off. The state of Iowa here. Now, this was an interesting one. It was another state that Ford won with the plurality of the vote. It was only separated by a point. If I'm not mistaken, when Carter was president, I was reading, he actually opposed expanding farm subsidies, which is a big issue in the state due to a lot of farmers being in the state. So that kind of had a hand in Ford winning it, but it was still narrow due to Carter doing good in rural areas in the state. I could say this might be another toss-up. Like I said, Carter was actually against expanding farm subsidies, and that wouldn't really bode well for him. But that was actually while he was president, I believe. So since this is candidate Carter, I could see him pulling out Iowa. Since, like I said, Rockefeller wouldn't have great rural support, Carter would have a better rural support. And for that reason, I think he could pull it out. Excuse all these notifications here from YouTube. But getting back into this, I think Carter would win Minnesota due to his running mate Mondale being from there. Solid win there. I think Rockefeller would do pretty decent, like in some of the suburbs in the state, like Minneapolis. But I think the rest of the state would overwhelmingly favor Carter. And like I said, Mondale being from there would help Carter win it. Being a more Democratic state since this year of 76. It's called that. State of Wisconsin went for Carter. I was about to say Nixon. Plurality of the vote, as you see there. It was a close one, as you see. Close to a couple points. Like I said, stagflation was a big issue in this election. Carter did better in this part of the state, as you see there. And I think for that reason they could pull it out against Rockefeller due to, like I said, the economy being an issue in this election. Stagflation, as I said, I think we have Carter the victory there. And like I said, doing better in a more farmer-friendly state like in Iowa. Michigan was a fourth state. It was his home state, in fact. This one, I don't know. I could see Rockefeller doing good in places like the suburbs, like Detroit. I could see him doing good in Macomb County, Flint. But I think Carter would do better elsewhere, like in the rural areas of the state, do better in upstate Michigan, as you see there. And I think for that reason, since Ford's not on the ticket, that Carter would pull it off. I think it would be a close one, as I said. I could say Rockefeller doing better, and like I said, Macomb, Flint, Detroit. But I think the rest of the state would hand Carter the victory. Like I said, kind of a tough one there, but I could say Carter pulling it out due to the economic conditions there in the stem. And the state of Ohio, another one we went for Carter. It did good in the rural areas as expected, and with stagflation being an issue, I think he would pull it out. It was actually the closest state of the election, I believe. Very narrow. In fact, I'm going to go to that now to show how close it was. Margin of 0.2%. 0.27 actually, but Carter did good in the northeastern part where it was typically a more Democratic stronghold. More working class area of the state. It did good in southern counties. Ford did better elsewhere. Carter, like I said, doing good in northeastern and southern part of Ohio. I think he would win against Rockefeller here. Due to, like I said, the economy being a big issue and Ford's part of Nixon. The state of Pennsylvania and Virginia remain, and also Hawaii. Pennsylvania, I think, would be a very close one. I could see Rockefeller doing good in the suburbs like Ford did, due to being from the Northeast. But Carter did good in places like Western PA, which was a Democratic stronghold around the time. And I think it would be a narrow one, or I should say narrower than it was, due to Rockefeller having suburban support like in Philadelphia and Bucks County, places like that. But due to Western PA and the economy being an issue, I think Carter would pull it off. And that does put him over the top at 293. But for the rest of these, Virginia and Hawaii, I'm going to go to Hawaii. Was a Carter state, typically have been very Democratic, and only won by a couple of points, though, interestingly. It was seen as a more competitive state back then, but still a lean Democratic state. So that reason I think Carter would pull it off since he won it in our timeline. And this just leaves the great Commonwealth of Virginia, which went for Gerald Ford. He did better in the Richmond and Nova suburbs, as if they were more Republican back then. Carter did great in the rural areas. And plurality of the vote that Ford won it. I could see Rockefeller doing good in the suburbs like Ford did. I could see Carter increasing his support in rural areas more. Another tough one, but since Ford wasn't narrowly able to pull it off, I think Rockefeller could due to the suburbs, but I think it would be very tight. I could see it being less than a point, like 0 point something there, that Rockefeller could win it, but I could see it honestly flipping to Carter too, due to increasing support in the rural areas, but I think if Ford was able to pull it off due to the suburbs, that Rockefeller did the same, but very narrowly though. And here's the results with Carter winning 297 to Rockefeller's 240, so he does flip states like South Dakota, Oklahoma, Iowa, while Rockefeller hangs on to the rest of the states at 4-1, and he also wins a some state in New York. So an interesting one here. And if you agree or not, just comment below what you think. Subscribe, hit the bell if you haven't, and I'll see you next time.